Born as the youngest child of the legendary Dark Knight Sparta and the human Eva, Dante would have a normal childhood until around the age of 8, when Sparta would be killed and soon after the demons would attack, killing Eva, and as far as Dante knew, his brother Virgil would also be slain. Dante would survive, making connections with various people to help him, and at the age of 18, Dante would encounter Virgil once again, who would send his partner Arkham to lure Dante in to take his half of the perfect amulet and gain their father's power. Meanwhile, making another ally in the fellow devil hunter and Arkham's daughter named Lady, before he and Virgil would do battle and Dante would defeat Virgil, who chose to stay in the demon world. Years later, Dante would be sought out by a woman named Trish, who just so happened to look like his mother. Following Trish to Millet Island to defeat the resurrected Demon King Mundus. During this mission, Dante would face several powerful demons, including Nello Angelo, who would reveal himself to be a corrupted Virgil under Mundus's control. Dante would defeat these demons and his brother once again before Trish would betray him, revealing that she was a demon created by Mundus and had lured him to Millet Island to kill him. However, when she would be about to be killed, Dante would save her, claiming he only did so because of her resemblance to Eva. Now taking on the Demon King directly, Dante would use his father's power to defeat Mundus, where Trish would assist in finally finishing Mundus off and bringing a plan for them to escape the island from. Over the years, Dante would continue hunting demons, occasionally taking jobs both with and for Trish and Lady. On one such mission, the three would travel to the island of Fortuna, with Dante assassinating the Order's leader after gaining proof of them manipulating demons to gain their power. During this assassination, Dante would meet and would do battle with a young knight of the Order named Nero, who possessed a demonic right arm and had a resemblance to Virgil. Dante would ultimately lose the fight and would leave, suspecting Nero to be his nephew, and would encounter him a few more times, and would then have his suspicions confirmed when he saw Nero wielding the Amato. Seeing that Nero was rushing in out of anger, Dante would fight and defeat the young man, forcing him to calm down and allowing him to use Virgil's sword. However, Nero would be defeated and Dante would have to save him, battling his way back to the main city before returning the Amato to Nero, who would then escape and defeat the Order's resurrected leader. And Dante would allow Nero to keep his father's sword and would entrust him with the name Devil May Cry, allowing him to operate under Dante's brand. Several years later, Dante would be approached by his longtime friend Morrison and a young man named V, who came to offer him a job, claiming that it was personal and that the demon who had resurrected was none other than Virgil. While Dante was skeptical at first, he would take V up anyway, bringing Trish and Lady along, as Morrison suggested, and confronting the new Demon King, recognizing his brother despite his changed appearance. While Dante would fight his brother's new form, he and the rest of the devil hunters, including Nero, would be defeated. Even after Dante would once again tap into the Sparta for power, it would be useless, and Virgil would put Dante into a month-long coma. Waking up, Dante would be met by V, who was about to stab him in the face with the retrieved Sparta sword. Choosing to ignore this, Dante would set off to confront Virgil one last time, freeing Trish from his control and leaving her with V before fusing his swords into a new weapon dubbed the Devil Sword Dante, and allowing Dante to access his true demonic form. With this newfound power, Dante would defeat Virgil and save Nero, but Virgil would retreat into the Qliphoth tree, gaining even more power and forcing Dante to track him down, where Dante would fatally injure his brother. However, at the last moment, Nero and V would appear, and V, seeming to be on the verge of death, would ask Dante to allow him to finish Virgil off once and for all, to which Dante would agree, but this would be a trick, as V was Virgil's human half, who would then merge with his demonic half. However, Virgil wouldn't be willing to finish Dante off in his injured state and would retreat to the top, or technically the bottom of the tree, giving Dante time to recover before they'd meet, both going all out and severely injuring each other when Nero would show up, having activated his own devil trigger and would force the two to stop fighting. And while they didn't totally end their battle, the twins agreed to work together in order to cut down the tree and close the portal, and sealing themselves in hell for the moment, where the twins would continue their battle, now seeming to have grown to understand each other and would fight as brothers rather than enemies. Very little is known about the Slayer's past before becoming a Marine of the UAC. All that's known for certain is that he had a wife, a child, and a pet rabbit named Daisy, and at one point would be ordered to fire on a group of civilians, but he would refuse and even attack his superior officer, resulting in him being dishonorably discharged and stationed on a Mars base where he would first face the demons of hell, fighting them over many different encounters, either being specifically dragged to hell or seeking the demons out himself as revenge for his family and Daisy. Eventually, after an unknown amount of time, the Slayer would be lured into a blood temple and would have the building collapsed on him, knocking him out long enough for the demons to put him into stasis, where he would remain for an unknown amount of time, waking up to yet another demon invasion where he would be guided by a man named Samuel Hayden through Mars, fighting his way to Hayden, who would turn out to be an artificial intelligence and would tell him to find a helix stone so that he could locate Hell's energy source, the well, eventually finding it and using the crucible to absorb its energy and cut off flow to it. The Slayer would then be teleported out of Hell by Hayden, who would restrain the Slayer and would take the crucible and teleport away. Now the Slayer and an artificial intelligence, Vega, would work together, hunting down the Hell priests and eventually killing them, and along the way recovering Hayden's body as well as the crucible. And after killing the final Hell priest, the Slayer would be trapped by their master, the Khan Maker, but would quickly escape using the crucible. Once again, following Hayden's lead, the Slayer would fight and kill the Khan Maker in Hell, as well as the Icon of Sin on Earth. With the demons momentarily repulsed, the Slayer and Hayden would track down the Seraphim, uploading Hayden into it and revealing them to be the same entity. The Slayer would then track down and destroy the life sphere of a being known as the Father, who was supposedly the creator of all things, and would take the Dark Lords, hoping to resurrect him in order to destroy the demons once and for all. Defeating the Seraphim after it tried to stop him and resurrecting the Dark Lord, immediately trying to kill him, but the Dark Lord would teleport away, and the Slayer would be forced to fight his way back one last time, confronting the Dark Lord, who would reveal that he was Davoth, the true creator of all realms, and that he was betrayed after seeking out the cure to mortality itself. With the two battling, the Slayer would be victorious and kill Davoth, similarly killing all demons outside of Hell, but as a result of his connection to Davoth, the Slayer would fall unconscious and would be placed in another sarcophagus, waiting for another invasion from Hell. Hello and welcome everyone to a very special episode of the Versus series celebrating the channel getting to 1,000 subscribers. For this, I decided to let you all pick an opponent for the Doomslayer from Doom Eternal, and you all pretty decisively chose Dante from Devil May Cry 5, getting over 50% of the vote. Starting off for this fight, I will be using both as they are in their latest games, canonically, meaning that all information from Dante will be coming from Devil May Cry 5, and all information on the Doomslayer will be from Doom Eternal. This means no equipment, abilities, or anything else from previous games will be taken into account for this breakdown. Now, as I'm sure many of you noticed in the title, this fight will take place under Equalized stats. Now, as always, I will be explaining the reasoning as for why in the physical section, but going off of the poll, I happen to know for a fact that most of you don't know why, as Dante's actually the one whose stats don't stack up to the Doomslayer's, meaning that if you want to know who would win without equalized stats, well, Dante gets stomped with lore scaling. And yes, that's including Pinnacle of Combat's 9th dimensional scaling, immeasurable speed, and his Devil Trigger multipliers, right? So with all that, let's get out. So with all that out of the way, let's start by comparing these two physically. During the events of Devil May Cry 5, Dante would be a 43-year-old human-demon hybrid standing at 6 feet 3 inches tall or 1.9 meters and weighing around 200 pounds or 90 kg, and would be in peak physical condition, having fought demons his entire life, both to survive and for income, with his physical condition being boosted by his natural demonic biology, which granted him immense strength, speed, durability, along with a plenitude of other abilities he has natural access to. Strength-wise, Dante is and has always been insanely powerful. Considering he's comparable to Virgil, he's been strong enough to kill demons since he was 8, and in all of his appearances is shown to no-diff entire mobs of demons that are each far superior to normal humans. Effortlessly stomped a demon that could casually destroy large stone structures, could pry open a large demon's mouth with one leg, created a large explosion just by swinging his sword, matched Abigail in his base form, with this demon damaging a skyscraper with a single attack, and could block a blow from a kaiju-sized demon known as the Savior, and even pushed it off of himself after Nero killed it. And all of that is before we get into scaling. As said before, he should scale to Virgil, who is stated in the novel Before the Nightmare to have actually been more powerful than a weakened Mundus, and that if he hadn't been injured in his fights with Dante, he would have won. And when working together, the twins defeated Arkham, who was amped by the Sparta Sword, which would later allow Dante to beat a full power Mundus. All this leading us into the Demon King himself, who in his fight with Dante casually created a universe for them to fight in. But that's not all, as Dante also fought and killed Argosax in his base form, who is merging the human and demon realms together with his mere presence, both realms being stated multiple times to be infinite or endless in size. And finally, he was able to easily toy around with and managed to defeat Nero in their second fight, even after Nero injured him in the first time, forcing him into his Devil Trigger state. And a much younger Dante being able to walk off powerful attacks from the Yamato after getting his Devil Trigger boost, which is capable of cutting through souls. And souls, according to Pinnacle Combat, are simple 9th dimensional objects. However, it's not like Dante sacrificed any speed for all that power, being equally as overwhelmingly fast. He has often taken on hordes of demons on his own with no difficulty, blitzing many of them. Managed to grab Lucia and move her out of the way of an explosion before the blast reached her. In the anime, he dodged a sound-based attack with zero difficulty, can block and evade point-blank gunfire like it's nothing, and even caught a bullet with his teeth in Devil May Cry 3, and has consistently shown the ability to react to lightning, taking on Nevin, the original Griffin, as well as V Summon of the same name, all of which attack with lightning, and Dante was easily able to evade these attacks. And with V Summon, he effortlessly deflected a lightning bolt to fire directly above him, as well as the Blitz Demon in Devil May Cry 4, who explicitly fought at lightning speeds. Dante has also been fighting enemies with lightspeed attacks since the first game, canonic, being able to dodge lasers from a demonic chess piece in Devil May Cry 3, and can even block them with Royal Guard. He kept pace with Virgil, who can move at similar speeds and was probably even a bit faster than Dante, and in his Devil Trigger state, which at a minimum doubled Virgil's speed, as well as the Nightmare Demon in Devil May Cry 1, which fires a high amount of lasers at once, and should be far faster in Devil May Cry 4, as he is considered to have surpassed his father by that point, or at the very least would be rivaling him. And when Dante used the Sparta sword to gain his father's power to face Mundus, they fought while moving at massively faster than light speeds. And finally, he kept up with Pluto, who is stated to be so fast he transcended the dimensional axis of the time stream, creating the illusion of teleportation and making Dante, as well as anyone else who can scales to him, immeasurable. At this point, I'm sure no one who's been paying attention is expecting Dante to lack in durability. In fact, it may just be his greatest area, as the games seem to enjoy showing off just how much punishment Dante can tank and just walk off like it's nothing. He was shot in the head by Lady and acted more annoyed than hurt. He's been turned into the equivalent of a pincushion by demons and should be relative to Virgil, who survived the exact same thing as an 8-year-old child. Has been stabbed through the chest with multiple demonic greatswords throughout the years. Survived hits from Beowulf, a demon stated to hit with the force of a supernova, as well as strikes from Virgil's Devil Trigger state with the Beowulf as a devil arm, which should at a minimum double his attack potency. He also got right back up after a brutal beatdown by his nephew Nero, who was able to crush the Savior's face with his Devil Bringer and overpowered a Sparta amped Sanctus. Tanked hits from the Nightmare Demon, which Mundus feared would destroy the entire demon realm, which is stated to be infinite in size, as well as survived hits from Mundus, who is even stronger, no diff and no soul attacks from Argosax, whose mere presence was merging the human and demon realms, which once again are stated to be separate universes of infinite size. And he was only stunned after a backhand from Nero, who was strong enough to overpower a weakened Virgil in his Sin Devil Trigger state, who should still be stronger than Urizen, who managed to put Dante in a coma a month before. And finally, he has consistently taken blows and magic attacks from the Yamato, as early as Devil May Cry 3, with this blade being capable of splitting souls in half, with souls in Devil May Cry being simple 9th dimensional objects, giving Dante, at bare minimum, 9th dimensional scaling. During the events of Doom Eternal, the Slayer is a human male in his late 20s to early 30s, standing at 6 feet 8 inches or 2 meters tall, and around 360 pounds or 163 kilograms, being in insanely good shape. As a Marine, he would have conditioned his body to excellent condition, and this was only boosted by his many battles with the demons of hell, and then was boosted even further with the Praetor suit, which, considering he wears for the vast majority of Doom 2016 and throughout the entirety of Doom Eternal, and as DLCs, it will be taken into consideration for this segment. And finally, his ascension into a primeval, making him even more powerful than before, quite literally making him godlike. After waking up from being put in stasis, he immediately broke a metal wrist for strength and smashed a demon's head apart with one hand. He can break demons' bones with a single punch. with the average imp demon being able to tank bullets shot at point blank range with no damage, requiring high caliber explosive or energy weapons to even hurt. And the Doomslayer consistently rips demons apart, even tearing smaller ones in two with his bare hands. He can break a pinky demon's jaw, can rip off a Baron of Hell's horn and kill it with a single blow of its own body part. He can overpower larger demons like cyber mancubuses and revenants with ease, with all of these demons being shown to be powerful enough to rip Doomslayer apart in their death animations, and can punch into the hide of a Hell Guardian, which are strong enough to resist sustained submersion in molten lava. It's also stated and confirmed by one of the developers that he has killed multiple Titans, massive demons, before gaining the Praetor suit with his bare hands, even though they are stated to require the Crucible, a weapon powered by an infinite energy source to kill, as well as the Icon of Sin, which Samuel Hayden states is the demon's last resort of destroying Earth. Now, even at face value, this could be interpreted as a planet surface level to planetary level threat. But with statements, it's even more powerful, stating that its very presence is damaging to the dimension of Earth, and that it would eventually result in the creation of a black hole that would consume our universe, which in Doom is stated to be infinite in size. There are even more examples that place this amount of power at consistent, with Vega theorizing that the damage caused by his battles have actually created a multiverse to implode on itself. He's also killed the Conmaker, which is from a higher reality or dimension than our own, giving him higher dimensional scaling, and finally, he killed Davoth, the true creator of all the realms, which is confirmed by the Father, including Hell, which is stated to be beyond the constraints of time, space, and dimensions, which would place Davoth as its creator and the Slayer, as he was able to kill him in single combat, at outer-versal levels of attack potency. The Doomslayer doesn't lack in the speed department either. He can keep up with countless demons from Hell, taking on entire armies even without the Praetor suit. He can clear small distances in less than a second, bum rushing his prey. He can even outrun his own missiles, and considering he can fight while running at these speeds, means it should absolutely be attributed to his combat speed as well. And if you don't believe that, he has flat out dodged missiles from demons, as well as many attacks from demons made of Argent energy. And now, I really hope you're ready for a big jump here, because the Slayer was able to fight and react to the Seraphim, with this being and the others like it that he's defeated like the Conmaker being said to be able to fly through all of creation, with the universes in Doom being consistently described as infinite in size. And they don't just fly through our universe, but all of creation, which should account for countless multiverses comprised of infinite universes of infinite size. However, that's not the end of it. Yes, dear viewer, there is actually a level of speed above stacking infinite on infinite, and it once again comes back to Davoth, who once again created a realm beyond time, space, and dimension. However, time is actually the important factor this time around, as it means that Davoth's movement is unrestricted by time, which automatically makes his speed, and by extension of keeping up with Davoth, the Slayer's speed, immeasurable, meaning that we simply cannot comprehend how fast they are. And finally, durability, which honestly by now you should know is going to be just as broken. Starting off with his Praetor suit, this armor boosts his durability and is said to be outright impenetrable. And while this is likely hyperbole, considering the armor stood up to and allowed him to take attacks from Davoth, this means that the armor alone has allowed the Slayer to more than likely be able to no-sell attacks from all but the strongest beings, such as the Icon of Sin, the Cyber Demon, the Conmaker, or Davoth himself. Doomslayer has also been shown to no-sell explosives going off at point-blank range, can tank physical attacks from powerful demons such as Pinkies and Barons of Hell, strikes from Titans as well as the Icon of Sin, all of which tower over him, can survive Argent energy attacks from various demons, with certain demons being stated to use Argent energy of infinite power, survived being in close proximity to the Icon of Sin for a prolonged period of time, even though the Icon of Sin's mere presence was damaging to Earth's infinite dimension. He was able to tank Vega's core exploding, which was powered by Argent energy so powerful it produced a heat hotter than theoretically possible, which should make it Yeah, I'm not even gonna try to say that number, but as you can see, it could very accurately be described as hot as hell. He battled the Seraphim and Khanmaker, who was even more powerful, being made by Davoth directly, instead to come from a higher dimensional realm, and finally fought and tanked attacks from Davoth himself, and as stated before, created Hell, a realm infinite in size and unbound by the concept of dimensions, existing purely for destruction, which should put Davoth's own destructive power on a similar level. It is very easy to see that both of these one-man armies are incomprehensibly powerful, both wielding power that far exceeds the limits of what you and I can honestly comprehend in existence. However, even then, there is a pretty big power gap between these two, and as I've already stated, that power gap is in Doomslayer's favor. Allow me to explain why. Starting off with strength and durability, Dante scales above the Amato, which was able to split Virgil's soul in half, and souls in Devil May Cry being explicitly stated to be ninth dimensional objects, and Dante withstanding the Amato's demonic abilities even when amped by Virgil's Devil Trigger and Sin Devil Trigger states. And in Dante's own Sin Devil Trigger, he casually destroyed a barrier created by the Amato, putting both his attack potency and durability at over 9th dimensional. Meanwhile, Doomslayer's best scaling comes from his fight with Davoth, where he fought and killed Davoth, who created a realm beyond time, space, and dimensional limits, placing him at Outer Versal. Now, you may be wondering, just how much above Dante is Doomslayer? Well, let me put it to you this way. Even if you said Dante's Devil Trigger state was a 1,000 times multiplier, and that his Sin Devil Trigger was a 5,000 times multiplier on top of the Devil Triggers, Dante still wouldn't be strong enough to hurt Doomslayer, or durable enough to take a single one of his attacks. Speed is the only area where I have to assume they're even, regardless of Equalized stats, as both have immeasurable time scaling. Dante keeping up with Pluto, who moves so fast he transcended the dimensional axis that time is on, and the Doomslayer keeping up with Davoth, who created Hell, which is stated to be beyond the limit of dimensions and time itself. And as I've stated multiple times, if Davoth created Hell, he should similarly be above them, placing him and the Slayer at immeasurable as well. So, well, these two are roughly even in speed, at least as far as I can tell with two beings who have transcended the limits of time. Their other areas are astronomically different, to the point that if you don't equalize the stats, Dante gets fodderized the instant Doomslayer gets his hands on it. So I have no choice but to bump Dante's attack potency and durability up to make this a fight at all. But I will still be granting the Doomslayer the edge in physical abilities. As said before, for this breakdown, I will be only breaking down Dante's arsenal from Devil May Cry 5 exclusively, meaning only the weapons he brought into his first encounter with Urizen and still had by the end of the game will be considered for this breakdown. However, even just with Devil May Cry 5 being taken into account, Dante is a walking armory who has a weapon for just about any situation. Starting off, we have the Balrog, a set of demonic gauntlets and greaves. Unlike his other hand-to-hand centric weapons, Balrog had two different modes, one for punching and one for kicking. Well, less that they couldn't be used together, more so that the flame, and as a result the majority of power in the weapon, could only be in one section at a time, meaning Dante would heavily prioritize that section. This devil arm also granted him shoulder pauldrons while in use, granting some extra protection. Cavalier is a two-stage weapon, its first form being that of a motorcycle, which, while not a standard weapon by any stretch of the imagination, Dante has been shown to be able of using this form effectively in combat. But its more dangerous state is a pair of large twin buzzsaws, which, while slow, inflict a massive amount of damage. And while not the fastest weapon, he makes up for this by using its wheel saws to boost his mobility with the weapon, or simply drive right into his opponents for a rush attack in the motorcycle form. King Cerberus is possibly his most versatile weapon, and is inarguably so in terms of its elemental attacks, taking three distinct forms, either as a set of three-piece nunchucks connected by a ring, a three-piece staff, and a bow staff, with each form granting Dante a different elemental property to the weapon, with ice, lightning, and fire respectively, with the weapon being able to switch from one state to another mid-combo, making this weapon highly unpredictable and effortless to chain one attack into another. And finally, for melee weapons, we have the Devil Sword Dante, a weapon created by fusing the Rebellion and the Devil Sword Sparta, being a greatsword about 6.5 feet or 1.9 meters from the butt of the handle to the tip of the blade. This weapon, as Dante's unique devil arm, allows him to channel his demonic power easier and much more effectively than any other weapon in his arsenal, granting him more combative options when having done so. When enough demonic energy has been imbued into the weapon, it splits apart, widening its blade and allowing for more area of contact, but more importantly, freeing a set of 4 summoned blades, simply called the Sword Formation, that can aid Dante based on what style he is currently using. At standard, and with the Swordmaster style, they will attack with Dante, but as an exclusive ability to Swordmaster, when using this style, he doesn't need to actually wield the Devil Sword Dante to use the blades. In Gunslinger, they will act much like Virgil's own summoned swords, though not firing as rapidly or with nearly as much variety in how they can attack, but they will defend Dante automatically. With Trickster, they grant Dante more agility and mobility, allowing him to dash faster and with no delays, as well as jump a third time. And with Royal Guard, they act defensively, defending him and aiding with his block. All of these uses are also boosted by the Devil Trigger, but as I've already stepped on special abilities category's toes enough here, I'll just touch up on it again there rather than explaining it here. Dante can also summon the Devil Sword Dante at will, allowing for even quicker switching between his weapons when going to or from his blade. Not just limited to melee weapons, Dante also had an affinity for his large collection of firearms, which he would regularly use alongside his close quarters weapons. Starting with ranged weapons, we have his iconic twin handguns Ebony and Ivory, made by Neil Goldstein specifically for Dante. These handguns are a modified pair of M1911 semi-automatic handguns made specifically for killing demons. Thanks to Dante's own speeds, these pistols, when shot together, can fire at a rate comparable to automatic rifles. Each gun also has a unique fire mode, with Ivory having a burst fire mode that will shoot 3 bullets in quick succession, and Ebony firing powerful explosive shots for more damage. And finally, Dante has shown in every game to have the ability to channel his demonic energy into these guns, even further increasing their power. When handguns aren't enough, Dante brings out his Coyote A sawed-off shotgun, stated to be a standard shotgun but was modified by Dante for use against demons, and just like his handguns, he can channel his demonic power into this weapon. When he really needs more firepower, he pulls out the double Kalina Ann rocket launchers. Separately, they functioned identical to each other. However, Dante could use both at once for a higher rate of fire. Both had the function to let out a series of smaller, heat-seeking missiles which could target a single or group of enemies, could shoot out a retractable cord which would pull their enemies to him or allow it to work like a zipline. And when combined into a single cannon, they would form a high-powered energy blast that would inflict heavy damage to anything struck by the weapon. Finally, a weapon created by Nico and taking the form of a cowboy hat is the Dr. Faust, which allows Dante to pretend he's a billionaire and throw countless amounts of currency at his problems until they go away. Specifically, his red orbs, fragments of crystallized demonic blood primarily used to gain power. However, this devil arm allowed him to weaponize these orbs, firing at high speeds or surrounding Dante and moving around him as a sort of protective barrier. Dante can use the Faust against demonic entities to drain them of their blood and gain even more orbs to use as weaponry, as well as summoning a second hat to fight alongside him as a minion. Or if he really needs firepower, he can dump a massive amount of energy into the weapon and fire giant orbs that will rain down and deal catastrophic damage. Much like with his opponent, for Doomslayer, I will only be taking his arsenal from his most recent game, Doom Eternal, and its story DLC, The Ancient Ones. However, for the sake of evening out the melee departments, I will still be granting him the Crucible Blade alongside this arsenal, but for the record, this decision was made after determining that the inclusion of this weapon would not change the outcome of the category all on its own, as I will explain when comparing weaponry. Right, so, even just with the Slayer's collection of weapons from Doom Eternal, his gear is enough to make any admirer of firearms envious from the sheer amount and firepower of his arsenal. Starting with his protective gear, we have the Praetor suit, an ancient set of full-body combat armor designed specifically for the Slayer, which he would later customize in Doom Eternal to make it more mobile and deadly. The suit is theorized to boost his already godlike physical abilities, making him faster, stronger, and more durable, being said to be made of a material that is nearly indestructible. And considering what this armor survives, that most likely isn't an exaggeration by any means. While designed specifically against Argent energy, the suit has been shown to similarly ignore conventional damage, like explosions and melee strikes. The suit also grants increased mobility, allowing the Slayer to double jump and reach higher platforms or dash in, quickly closing the distance between him and whatever soon-to-be corpse got his attention. The suit also had 2 attachments that aided in combat, the first being a shoulder-mounted cannon. This weapon functions as a grenade launcher, firing both explosive grenades for high damage and ice grenades for immobilizing his prey. It also functioned as a flamethrower, blasting demons with fire so hot it could damage demons that are constantly around and can survive in molten lava. The Doom Blade is a simple wrist blade about 2 feet long that he typically uses as a way to more effectively rip and tear the hordes of hell apart, with this blade being strong enough to slay Davoth, who is stated to be beyond dimensions. And finally, there's Blood Punch, an upgrade to his suit that allowed him to attack in a radius around himself when engaging in melee combat. However, this would need to be charged before activation. His most basic melee weapon is the chainsaw, with the typical chainsaw weighing about 10 pounds with a toothed chain that spins at high speeds, letting him cut into anything. The Slayer has been shown to effectively use this weapon on a high amount of demons without needing to maintain or repair the tool. And I do mean tool. While pop culture likes to pretend otherwise, a chainsaw wouldn't be a good weapon for combat. However, Doomslayer's chainsaw isn't bound to our lame-ass limitations, and I'm choosing to justify this by saying that it's been modified to be able to withstand the blood and viscera that would normally jam the tool up in these situations. And to be fair, this is basically confirmed by its ability to cut through metal and the hides of demons that can withstand plasma weaponry. The Crucible is the Doomslayer's own blade made of Argent energy, which he used as a member of the Night Sentinels. Measuring at 6 feet, 5 inches, or 1.67 meters in total length, with the tip of the Argent blade being flared, allowing for a larger area of penetration with stabs. It is also serrated, with 3 small spikes on each side near the bottom of the blade, allowing for greater ease in cutting. The handle also opened up as a crossguard, allowing for defense and control and blade locks. This weapon is also stated to be the only one in the lore of Doom to be powerful enough to kill a Titan-class demon. This is likely due to the powerful Argent blade, with Argent energy having several statements that place it at infinite power. The Sentinel Hammer, or the Hellbreaker, was originally a weapon wielded by Valen, but is given to the Slayer in the Agent 1's DLC, an energy weapon created by the Night Sentinels to combat the demon horde that allowed the Slayer to put even more force into his attacks, as well as create an energy area of effect damage by slamming the weapon into the ground, which has been shown to easily stagger even the most powerful demons, and even Davoth himself. There are also his runes, of which he can have up to 3 equipped at once, with most of which just applying passive boosts to his abilities, but 2 of which allowing him to slow the flow of time, giving him more time to react to and outpace the demon horde. Now, before I get into the Slayer's ranged weapons, I would like to clarify that each gun the Doomslayer has in his arsenal has 2 separate optional upgrades that cannot be used at the same time. For this breakdown, just like usual when it comes to fighters with skill sets like this, I'll be going with my own personal loadout, or the upgrades I chose in my playthrough. The combat shotgun is a high-power, semi-automatic UAC military-grade shotgun, being stated to deal enough damage to keep it as an option even compared to plasma weapons. Exceptional at close range, but lacking the options for further range targets without proper modifications, which is why I chose the sticky grenades for my modification, allowing the weapon to fire up to 5 grenades before needing to reload, each of which will attach themselves to a target before exploding. Possibly his most iconic weapon is the Super Shotgun, a double-barreled, sawed-off shotgun with even more firepower than the combat shotgun, and with a superior range, though boasting a wider pellet spread. Rather than a modification to choose from like most other weapons, the Super Shotgun comes equipped with a pin-pronged meat hook, which can be used to easily close the distance between him and his prey, railing himself right into melee range while he'll most likely blow his targets away. The meat hook can also be used for traversal, and after being upgraded would set his enemies impaled by the hook on fire. The heavy cannon is a high-caliber automatic weapon, possibly his most basic weapon. There really isn't much to elaborate on outside of its modification, as with no real-life counterpart, there are no specifications to go on. Now, the modification I chose was the micro missiles, which, as the name suggests, allows the weapon to fire a collection of small missiles which will seek out targets before exploding on contact. The M220 chain gun, as the name suggests, is a Gatling gun, firing out of 4 rotating barrels for an insanely high rate of fire. According to its codex entry, this weapon was designed for use by soldiers decked out in heavy exo armor, firing 7.62 by 51mm bullets propelled by an electromagnetic casing, which allowed the weapon to both fire at even higher rates and with a faster velocity. The mod I chose for this weapon is its energy shield, which served both an offensive and defensive purpose, both defending the Slayer from incoming damage and allowing him to either bash his targets with it, or once upgraded, can launch the shield towards his enemies. The plasma rifle was designed by the UAC for military use, with the plasma rifle being described as standard energy-based weapon, firing superheated plasma that is hot enough to liquefy those on the receiving end of its fire. The weapon also boasted a high rate of fire, but this would quickly overheat the weapon if fired for too long without allowing the gun to cool, though it is particularly good against energy shields, causing them to explode with enough concentrated fire, which will also damage the user of the shield. The modification I went with was its heat blast, which allowed the weapon's heat shield to absorb the excess heat created by the plasma and weaponize it, firing in a radius in front of the Slayer and for a brief moment of time after the fact, enhancing the weapon's primary shots. The ballista is a semi-automatic ranged weapon created by the Night Sentinels, using concentrated Argent energy to precisely hit targets with high power blasts that are said to vaporize weaker targets on impact. Its weapon mod, Arbalist, will fire a dart-like projectile that will explode twice after a short time. The rocket launcher is just as the name suggests, a heavy weapon that fires rockets for when you just really want that particular demon dead. The mod I went with was its lock-on burst, which honestly is very self-explanatory name as it locks onto a target and then fires a burst of 3 rockets at it. The Unmaker is a fully automatic weapon created by the Makers, inspired by the weapons designed by the Night Sentinels. Firing the same Argent energy as the BFG, it isn't quite as powerful, but its higher rate of fire and still higher than average power makes it an excellent alternative for situations against a single powerful demon rather than the endless fodder normally in the Doomslayer's path. And last but certainly not least is the BFG 9000. The Doomslayer's most powerful weapon, able to kill large hordes comprised of all but the strongest demons in a single blast. This weapon will fire a powerful energy blast that will explode in an inescapable radius, reaching anything in sight, and is even powerful enough to damage the Icon of Sin, who I have already explained was damaging the very dimension of an infinite-sized universe. Oh boy, we have quite a bit to go over in this comparison, because fun fact, both of these weapon sections were over 1,000 words. So forgive me, or better yet, just straight up ask for elaboration if there's anything you're curious about or think I overlooked, because I'm not going to be covering every little thing, and will instead be going over the basics that are most likely to actually play a role and give advantages, rather than compare each and every weapon to each other. I'll be starting off by comparing their primary melee weapons, the Devil Sword Dante and the Crucible. And to be honest, it's a pretty close call with only one factor really giving one weapon the edge. Starting with overall length, the Devil Sword Dante has the slight advantage, being 1 or 2 inches longer than the Crucible. Now, the Crucible's uniquely shaped and argent blade would make it a more effective piercing weapon, as well as the serrated blade near the handle giving it a cutting advantage as well. However, the Devil Sword Dante's demonic channeling can increase its power output, overall evening out the general advantages and disadvantages, leaving one factor: the summoned blades created by the Devil Arm, which will attack with Dante, allowing him to inflict overall more damage with one attack, or even attack independently of Dante, making him harder to keep up with in melee combat. The advantage of their primary ranged weapons, Ebony and Ivory and the Super Shotgun, primarily comes down to the range that they will be used at, meaning I'll need to get a little bit ahead of myself once again and briefly touch on combat tactics. To be brief as possible, while they both prefer mid to close range combat, Dante actually has a higher preference towards melee combat, while the Slayer has a slight preference towards ranged combat, but similarly isn't afraid to get in close. And this means that Dante will be at a slight disadvantage as he's going to push for a more close engagement, and the Slayer with this specific weapon is going to want to use it at close range. And the Super Shotgun's meat hook will make this easier than if Dante decided he wanted to create distance. When judging firepower in an equalized stat setting, normally I would just say that the firepower is equal. However, lore-wise, we actually have a definitive answer. To get right into it, Dante's highest firepower weapon is the Dr. Faust, which Dante can use red orbs to deal out catastrophic damage with seemingly no upper limit, even allowing the player to one-shot Virgil in gameplay, while the Doomslayer's highest power weapon is of course the BFG 9000, which is powered by Argent energy and has the firepower needed to deal serious damage to the Icon of Sin and Davoth. Now gameplay-wise, the Dr. Faust would be stronger because it just straight up isn't balanced. However, in terms of lore, the BFG harming Davoth is is a far more impressive showing, as he would be leagues above both sons of Sparta. But with equalized stats, we can't scale based on that and instead have to judge by their power sources. And in that case, Argent Energy has far more going for it than red orbs. First of all, Dante is going to have a limited supply of orbs, meaning that not every shot is going to be at the same amount of power. And before anyone asks, no. Dante couldn't get more orbs from the Slayer, as orbs are explicitly made of demonic blood, while all of the BFG shots will hit with consistent power. And Argent Energy is described by the Seraphim as having infinite power, while Dante's orbs are a fixed and limited power source, meaning that the Doomslayer's BFG should be more powerful. Protection is a no-brainer in my eyes. Dante in terms of armor is completely outclassed by the Praetor armor, on top of it covering the majority of the Slayer's body. And even the protection of the summoned swords don't grant Dante the same level of protection, seeing as unlike the Praetor's suit, they break far easier, with the Slayer's armor being described as nearly indestructible, while the same cannot be said about the summoned swords formation, which still doesn't cover as much of Dante's body as the Praetor suit, even with the added protection of Balrog. Then we get to his other defensive abilities, such as the Chain Gun Energy Shield, which adds even more protection on top of that. Mobility is one that the overall boost needs to have Dante's powers examined to determine who overall has the mobility edge. But in terms of the boosts given by their equipment, it's rather even. The blades of the Devil Sword Dante grant Dante an extra jump and dash just like the Praetor suit, and the Cavalier Bike along with the Super Shotgun Meat Hook allow for greater ease of closing the distance, overall making this area even in terms of the boosts given by their gear. But I do want to make it clear, not their mobility options in total. Variety goes several ways depending on what you're looking at specifically. Overall weapon variety goes to the Slayer with 17 total weapons, almost twice the number of Dante's 10. Technically 9 considering he has 2 versions of the Kalina and that are practically identical. They even out when it comes to melee weaponry, both having 6 close combat weapons if you count each stage of Cerberus as its own weapon, which I personally do, but even if you don't, King Cerberus would still even this area out with its elemental attacks. Ranged weaponry undoubtedly goes to the Slayer, however, who has 9 different guns, compared to Dante's 6, even counting Dante's Ebony and Ivory and twin rocket launchers as different weapons, and not counting the Slayer's shoulder cannon or its fire modes. Ways to attack actually goes to Dante, who has bladed weapons, blunt force, saws, demonic and artificial energy based attacks, bullets, rockets, fire, ice, lightning, and even crystallized demon blood. And while true, the Slayer has most of that under his belt, as he doesn't have any weapons that allow him to weaponize electricity or demon blood gives Dante the slight edge in attack variety, but overall still giving the Doomslayer the variety advantage for his wider arsenal. And so, with the Slayer having 4 advantages to Dante's 1, I grant the Doomslayer the edge in weapons and equipment. Now, one last time for the people in the back. This will be an examination of Dante's powers that he showcased in Devil May Cry 5 only. No abilities or variation of the same abilities from previous games will be allowed in this breakdown. Now, I know you're probably tired of hearing about this, but I do feel it's necessary to hammer this point in, as I tend to see a lot of Devil May Cry fans automatically compositing Dante, and try to attribute abilities like Quicksilver and the Doppelganger to games after the fact, which I will not be doing for this breakdown. However, if it makes the Dante fans feel any better, the ability I see discussed most that is typically attributed to giving Dante the win is Quicksilver, which won't matter in this fight anyway, as both he and the Slayer are so fast that they have transcend time's restraint on their movement, meaning Quicksilver will not affect the Slayer regardless, just like Doomslayer's runes. And finally, as the Doomslayer has no powers that cannot be attributed to gear or power-ups, Dante will have the edge in this category by default. However, I will still be going over Dante's collection of powers so that everyone is familiar with what he is capable of. As a human-demon hybrid, Dante had natural access to a collection of demonic abilities that allowed him to take his combative abilities to the next level, and keep up with demons that boasted being some of the most powerful in the demon realm, eventually gaining enough mastery in his abilities to surpass even his father, the legendary Dark Knight Sparta. Now, while I actually don't believe Dante went out of his way to deepen his demonic prowess with his powers, he clearly did learn to use the ones that came naturally to him extremely well, to the point that he used some abilities that he shared with his twin Virgil better, despite Virgil actively seeking out and trying to deepen his demonic abilities. The first and most common of his powers was his demonic channel, which worked as the name suggests, allowing him to focus his demonic energy into his weaponry, increasing their attack potency, and it has been shown that this ability can be used pretty consistently throughout various weapons. Most notably, his personal Devil Sword at Dante and Ebony and Ivory. Dante was also born with an incredible healing factor. This regeneration allowed him to survive catastrophic damage, such as his first fight with Virgil in Devil May Cry 3 that left him near death, and should scale to Virgil, who in that same game healed to the point where he was unfazed after being cut in half with Dante's rebellion. It is also a part of the reason Dante was able to get up after his beatdown from Nero in Devil May Cry 4, and considering his healing should be above Nero's, it should be capable of resurrecting him even if he is killed, as it's stated that demons in Devil May Cry can fully recover from losing their souls and bodies. Next up, we have his styles, which, while debatable if they're actually powers in themselves or simply a gameplay explanation for his use of the abilities, I still will be taking them into account either way, with the exception of Swordmaster, which is more display of his blade skills than his powers. The first of his styles is Gunsling, which, to be honest, doesn't display much of note for powers, primarily being a ranged counterpart to Swordmaster other than one aspect, in that it allows him to automatically channel his demonic energy into his guns, implying that this ability no longer requires concentration like before, and that his mastery of channeling has become a passive ability. Next up, we have Trickster, a style based on agility and evasion. While not solely used with this style, it allows him to greater use of his demonic platforms, allowing him to get a boost, typically using them for an extra pair of jumps while already in the air, or alternatively, he can kick off of them for an alternative to his standard dash. This style also showcases Dante's ability to teleport, instantly appearing wherever he needs to on a battlefield, but typically appearing right next to his opponent to quickly attack. Royal Guard is the style that showcases Dante's defensive abilities, blocking and seeming to put up a barrier of demonic energy based on his Devil Trigger gauge, allowing him to store the damage he would normally have taken and reflect it at his opponents, either as a direct energy attack or at a range. This power and the energy gained from it can also be increased if timed directly before an incoming attack lands, leading to massive damage inflicted on opponents. Now we come to what was for the longest time Dante's most powerful ability, his Devil Trigger. The most basic use of this form was that it multiplied his physical abilities. At a minimum, this is stated in the Devil May Cry 1 guidebook to be a 2x multiplier. However, this could have grown since then, but I don't really have anything else to go on. This form also boosted Dante's healing abilities, allowing him to regenerate at an advanced level even compared to his standard healing. This form also seemed to infect his combat mentality, as he was far more willing to use his other demonic powers in this form, and much more aggressively to boot, getting the most out of his powers and integrating them even more fluidly into his attack sequences. And finally, we have his newest trump card, the Sin Devil Trigger, stated by Nico to be Dante's true form with no telling how much power he possesses, even being above his standard Devil Trigger form. While he doesn't heal in this state like he would in his standard transformation, he becomes so powerful that enemy attacks don't even seem to slow him down, allowing him to power through strikes from the strongest of demons, including Urizen, with only Virgil's own Sin Devil Trigger being able to counter his own. This form also granted Dante abilities not accessible in his base form. To start off, Dante grants a faster teleportation, or at the very least could seemingly phase through attacks when doing so. He also gained the power of flight, using a combination of his wings and demonic power to fly into the air at high speeds. He could fire balls of pure demonic energy from his hands that hit with immense power, and could also create what seems to be a black hole of demonic energy, stated to explode from within an opponent, allowing it to at least partially ignore durability limits. He could also fire a barrage of hundreds, possibly even thousands of lasers from his wings that would seek out and shred his opponents apart. Like in all of my matchups, I will be using Star Wars lightsaber fighting forms to better and more easily describe how both of these opponents approach combat with their particular styles. Now with that out of the way, let's begin. As far as I can find officially, Dante has received little to no official combat training, meaning that the entirety of his combative performance throughout all the games is most likely self-taught. However, this has in no way held the Demon Slayer back, as he has held his own with some of the strongest beings in the underworld, and in many cases outfought them, including Abigail, Argo Sax, Nello Angelo, Bariel, Pluto, and even his brother Virgil on multiple occasions. He even fought a man trained by Sparta himself and easily bested him, commenting on how he was unimpressed by the man's and his father's skills. Even after the man showed Dante his true form, Dante defeated him casually. His main form in combat would be Form 6 Naiman. This fighting style was a hybrid martial art created by effectively combining elements of the previous lightsaber forms to a single generalized form. Naiman balanced out the various specializations of the other forms, covering many of the basic moves but focusing on overall moderation. This resulted in a fighting style that lacked a significant advantage but also lacking any serious drawbacks, and thereby not leaving users as exposed as some of the more aggressive or specialized forms. Overall, Naiman had a fairly relaxed focus on blade work, designed as a simple, easily mastered fighting form. To compensate for the relaxed focus on blade work and lack of significant specialization, Naiman training encouraged the integration of force-based attacks in combat, or in Dante's case, his demonic abilities, such as his demonic channeling or his teleportation. However, Dante would primarily use this form to fluidly go from one weapon and combat style to another with no difficulty. I do, however, see Dante specializing into two main styles, particularly Forms 5 and 1 depending on what type of opponent he's fighting, with some showings of Form 2 and 4 on occasion, but less consistently than the other two. The first form he chose to specify in particular was Form 5 Gemso, which was a style primarily developed for blade-on-blade combat utilizing a combination of blocks and parries. A Gemso user maintained a proper foundation of defense against both ranged and melee attacks. Immediately after defending against an opponent's strike, a Gemso stylist followed up with an attack of their own, bringing the force of the opponent's own blow against them and seeking to dominate the duel. Gemso also placed a heavy focus on brute strength and pure power, with wide, powerful strikes and parries followed immediately by a counterattack. Dante would primarily use this form against the few opponents who could actually challenge him in single combat, such as Nero, Virgil, or Pluto. The other style, which he primarily used in large group engagements, was Form 1 Shicho. Often considered a basic or beginner's form, however, it was very effective against groups, focusing on wide sweeping motions primarily used on multiple opponents. However, this form suffered from being impractical against a single, well-trained opponent who could exploit its wide attacks, but was still an excellent option for opponents that were either ill-equipped to handle the superior swordsman or can't match their skill. Ataru is another form he's shown pretty consistently, though I doubt it will play as much of a part in a one-on-one engagement. Ataru as a main form taught the user to stay in constant motion and deliver an unending flurry of attacks to overwhelm a single opponent's defense, typically aided by acrobatic maneuvers for closing and creating distance. Dante would primarily use this form against significantly larger opponents, moving around them while still applying a constant offense. He'd also apply this style with his gunplay quite regularly, moving at high speeds while continuing to fire at the demons he's been sent to kill. And finally, he's also shown some knowledge of Makashi-style fencing from time to time, particularly shown in his final duel with Nello Angelo in the comic adaptation of Devil May Cry 1, where he evenly clashed blades with the Dark Knight and managed to defeat him with a feint after recognizing his fighting style. You could even attribute Sarisu to his use of Royal Guard, but I personally see that as a bit of a stretch, so I won't be going too in depth with that. We also need to briefly go over Dante's unarmed combat, or his strikes with gauntlets and greaves, to which I see him using three styles: kickboxing, taekwondo, and capoeira. Kickboxing is a deceptively simple fighting style. As the name suggests, it is centered around punches, typically jabs and hooks, as well as powerful kicks to knock out opponents. Taekwondo is a fighting style mainly involving kicks used for high power, precision, and mobility, allowing a practitioner to stay on the move while using this martial art far easily. Capoeira is quite literally a mixture of dancing and fighting, making it a heavily acrobatic style, less focused on strikes and more so on sweeps and takedowns. Tactically, Dante employs a simple yet effective set of tactics. When fighting demons that would actually pose a challenge for him, he typically starts engagements with a probing offense, usually starting with a series of power blows and testing the waters to see how an opponent will react to different combative approaches, learning their patterns and looking for any openings that he can exploit before spamming it, inflicting heavy damage into his opponents. This is best shown in his repeated fights with Virgil and even Nero throughout the years, as he'll typically struggle or even lose a fight before first getting a grasp of their combative style and adapting to it, allowing him to outfight these opponents, with Nero even commenting on how Dante seemed to be toying with him even though Nero had gotten significantly stronger since their first encounter. Dante also liked to employ mind games, typically going out of his way to mock and irritate the demons he fights, causing them to lash out more often and make mistakes that he would then exploit even further. The Doomslayer had a long and accomplished career, in the past having been both a UAC Marine and a member of the Night Sentinels, with the latter accepting him due to his skill and prowess when it came to killing demons, despite knowing next to nothing about him. As a member of the UAC, he was almost certainly given some form of hand-to-hand training on top of his marksmanship, although whatever types would be pure speculation on my end. As a member of the Night Sentinels, he would be even further train his aim, and they would also train him in the art of melee weapon-based combat, making him an even deadlier opponent in close-range encounters, to the point where he has no problems going from one weapon to another in quick succession, turning him into a walking barrage of death for those he faced. This combination of training, experience, and raw combative talent allowed the Slayer to not only hold his own against, but slaughter demons and corrupted warriors alike, such as the Marauders, resurrected Night Sentinels, who should have similar combat training to himself, and more experience fighting in the ways they trained him, as well as the Seraphim and the Khanmaker, members of a race eons older than the Slayer himself, with just as much more combat experience, having served Davoth and most certainly taken entire realms for him, as well as Davoth himself, who existed before creation and is the second most powerful being, second only to the Slayer himself. If you really pushed me to attribute any lightsaber fighting form to the Slayer, however, it would without a doubt be Form 7 Juyo. This incarnation of Form 7 was described as the most vicious form of lightsaber combat, due to its relatively high focus on one's internal emotions to gain dominance in combat. According to the Sith Lord Darth Traya, the form was both chaotic and erratic, with a heavy focus on offense. The tactics of Juyo were not nearly as graceful or linked as those of Ataru, instead referring to them as seemingly unconnected, staccato sequences. He also listed one of the great strengths of this form as its unpredictability. The form was also said to necessitate greater energy from the Form 5 due to broader wielding of a user's focus and deeper emotional link. Despite the challenges inherent with using the form, it could serve as a pathway to considerable power. It is in my opinion that the glory kills he performs on the many demons showcases his use of this form, viciously yet not mindlessly ripping his opponents apart in the blink of an eye, so he can continue with his onslaught of pain and focus on the next set of demons, clearly drawing from an unquenchable internal rage. While said to require mastery of all other forms of lightsaber combat, I unironically wouldn't even attribute the most basic form sheet show to him. Now, he's not a bad fighter, it's just clear that he's driven by his rage and aggression rather than any dedicated attack sequences. However, I would also like to remind people that use of lightsaber fighting forms is not a one-to-one comparison, but more a simplified explanation of combat styles with melee weapons, using another franchise that just so happens to have dedicated combat forms that can be applied to most fighters who use melee weapons. And as such, the limitation of needing to be a master of other forms that technically don't even exist in his world the way I talk about them would not be needed for the Doomslayer or any other combatant in my Versus series to effectively fight with this method. When it comes to tactics, the Doomslayer subscribes to the belief that the best defense is an overwhelming offense. The Slayer would almost always attack with an unending brutality, pressuring his targets with an unending yet very precise and deliberate plan of attack, aiming for weak points and exploiting weaknesses in one instant and ripping their guts out the next. While both of these demon-slaying badasses are nearly unmatched in their own worlds, when put head-to-head, only one can come out on top. However, general examples of skill in comparing the people they defeated won't give us any results. Both have defeated combatants that should by all accounts had them dead to rights. Dante has defeated the Demon Kings Mundus and Argos Sax, while the Slayer has taken out the Makers and Davoth, meaning they have both defeated beings with infinitely more combative experience than themselves, as well as fighters that rival if not exceed them in skill, such as the Marauders, Nello Angelo, Davoth once again, and Pluto, meaning both have combative showings that place them at the top tier of their respective verses. Really, examining this fight in terms of combative abilities comes down to a generalist versus a specialist, and which of them is bringing the right tool set to counter the others, meaning I will need to see if a combination of Dante's styles could give him the upper hand against the Slayers. Now, Dante's best style to combat Doomslayers is going to be 9-man, particularly its ability to switch combative styles on the fly, which won't allow the Slayer to get used to his combative style, and his implementation of his demonic abilities into his attack sequences will allow him to switch up the power of his strikes on a whim, especially once he starts pulling the Devil Trigger, which will only widen his options with demonic abilities. Gemso is going to be what Dante uses for the majority of this fight. Simply put, he won't be able to match the Doomslayer in terms of pure ferocity, meaning he's gonna need to play by his own strengths, meaning that keeping up his strong defense is going to be a must for him to defeat the Slayer, and I have a feeling he's going to realize this very quickly. The form would also allow him to respond much easier, as the Doomslayer's pure offensive would be disrupted if and when Dante manages to land his powerful counters. However, Dante does have a disadvantage of being the weaker of the two. Remember, even with equalized stats, I still grant the slight advantage to the character who would scale above the other. But Dante's Devil Trigger would allow him to turn this around, allowing him to, even if just briefly, be the more powerful fighter. Dante's Makashi, despite not being a major part of his moveset, I feel could actually play a pretty big part in the late fight, after they both have a grasp on each other's styles. As Dante experiments more and more, he's gonna learn and be able to work around the Slayer's style. However, at a baseline, this won't be his best option, but it still is an avenue for him to attack from, and one that could give him a serious late game advantage. Dante's Ataru probably won't play much of a factor after 1 or 2 attempts with it. True, an aggressive rushdown style could overwhelm another if Dante is the better user of that combative approach. However, there are 2 issues with that. Firstly, Dante's use of this style is more of a supporting element of his combative style, while the Slayer's is the entirety of his, meaning he's going to be able to apply it much more effectively. The Slayer also has the advantage with their physical abilities, meaning Dante won't be able to apply the speed or strength necessary to outperform Doomslayer with this approach. Once again, unless he uses the Devil Trigger. But unlike Gem So, that only solves half of Dante's issue with this style, meaning that it's most likely that even with the Devil Trigger active, this form will overall fall short. Shicho is simply too simple of a style to be used effectively on an opponent like the Doomslayer. True, it's not a bad style even against skilled opponents. However, the fact remains that in a one-on-one engagement between 2 master swordsmen, Dante has better options combatively speaking, and he's gonna know right off the bat that he'll need to focus on styles meant for single engagements. Tactically, despite them going about it in different ways, they actually plan to take their opponents down in the same way, attacking with different methods until finding and exploiting a weakness. However, considering neither has any glaring flaw, this would ultimately be a stalemate in terms of tactics. Which leads me to Dante's greatest advantage in this fight: his incredible capacity for adaptation and learning his opponent's combat style, which has been shown more consistently than the Slayer's. So in terms of overall skill, I believe that Dante has the slight advantage. His ability to move from one style to another in the blink of an eye, as well as apply a defense actually capable of holding him off for a time, is already deadly enough, allowing him to outmaneuver the Slayer and overall land more hits. Mix that in with his better showings of adaptability mixed with a willingness to implement tactics such as feints and sword binds to outduel the Slayer would overall mix into him having the more effective skill set and giving Dante the edge in combat skills and tactics. Let's set up this battle. Let's say it takes place in a merged dimension consisting of both the demon world and hell, which Dante is out investigating a way to undo after new fused demons start appearing on jobs, making them a tad more complicated than he'd like. Meanwhile, the Slayer had been in hell during the realms merging and has been fighting these new forms, also seeking the source of the dimensional merge. A shotgun blast to the chin caused the imp-like Reaper's head to explode in a mixture of brains, skull fragments, and sand of all things. The Slayer paid no mind to the strange combination that made up the demon's insides. Even if he had cared, he was too busy sidestepping a swipe from the claws of a cross between a pinky demon and some lanky lizard man-ass creature. Its claws elongated before shooting out after the Slayer, who effortlessly deflects the attack with his Doomblade, dashing in, meeting the amalgam head-on as it takes a bite at him. The Slayer grabs its jaws and forces it to the ground, the creature still biting hard enough that some of its teeth break against the Slayer's gloves. With a growl, he forces the upper and lower jaw so far apart that its cheeks tear open as he all but rips its head in half, throwing the disintegrating demon to the side as he moved past the battle-torn ruins he had destroyed, examining the unfamiliar symbols and markings, unsure of what to make of them. Though he didn't really get a chance, as an ant-legged baron of hell with 3 faces is thrown through the ruins, a sword flowing with what he could only assume was argent energy protruding from its chest. Standing on top of it was a humanoid demon, white jagged spikes across its head almost like hair, and dark red leathery wings in the shape of an overcoat. Its glowing red eyes and humanoid face seemed to hone right into the Slayer's, despite his helmet, as it ripped its blade from the corpse. And as it hit the ground, its form was engulfed in a glowing red ash that faded as soon as it appeared, revealing a almost normal looking middle-aged man, save for his stark white hair. Well, I'll be. Never seen anything quite like you before, Dante said, calling back the Devil Sword Dante and approaching the hulk of a man. His curiosity getting the better of him despite the Slayer's outright aggressive body language. In fact, Dante really had no right to be as surprised as he was when the Slayer lashed out with his Doomblade, looking to impale Dante, who sidesteps the strike rather casually and throwing his hands up in only slightly exaggerated shock and offense. Whoa now, totally uncalled for! The Devil Hunter whined as the Slayer simply swung his arm in an attempt to decapitate Dante, who in response summons his Devil Sword, moving it in front of the blade, expecting to be able to casually block the blow, only for his feet to actually slide back as sparks fly off their blades the moment they meet. Dante looks at his adversary with a growing smirk as he feels the hair stand up on his neck from the sheer amount of power he feels coming off of the Doomslayer. Pulling Ebony from its holster, he pops a few shots into the Slayer's helmet, shots that bounce right off, not even making the larger man flinch. Dante then breaks off, evading yet again as the Slayer pulls his super shotgun out, hit-firing the weapon and narrowly missing the crimson-clad demon, who responds with a similar strategy, pulling out Coyote A and thrusting it into the Slayer's face again before pulling the trigger, the demonic energy-enhanced shells still doing nothing, not even scratching the visor of the Praetor armor. The Slayer then takes the opportunity, reaching out with his free hand and grabbing Dante's sawed-off shotgun before firing his own right into Dante's chest, at point-blank range, sending the Devil Hunter flying back, landing on his feet and watching with irritation as the Slayer crushed the shotgun that had served Dante for years in his hand like it was nothing. Okay then, if guns won't cut it, Dante groaned, reaching around his back, pulling out Cerberus and giving it an experimental twirl as the Slayer fires his meat hook at Dante, the Devil Hunter deflecting the projectile to the side and moving in to close the distance himself as the Slayer does the same, switching from his shotgun to his ballista and firing at Dante, who deflects each shot until they were just about to get within melee range. Then he activated the 3-piece lightning staff mode, sending an unexpected surge of demonic energy that finally manages to hurt the Doomslayer as he's left seizing in shock. While this is happening, Dante takes special care to fry the ballista, as even by deflecting it, he could tell that it carried far more of a punch than he was willing to be hit with. This gives the Marine time to lash out with his Doomblade, only for it to be caught as Dante quickly transforms the weapon back into its ice nunchuck stage and freezing his entire arm. Then, in one fluid motion, Dante moves to the side, around the Doomslayer and striking him in the back of the knee, forcing his opponent to kneel before transforming the weapon once again into its flame staff, and giving it a spin before striking the Slayer so hard in the face that it sends him flying back. Doomslayer gets to his feet, letting out a low, irritated grunt before raising his frozen arm over his head and having a shoulder cannon blast it with fire, melting the ice encasing his limb instantly. Glaring at the half-demon from his cracked visor, Doomslayer pulls his sentinel hammer from his back, giving it a flourish as he stomped back over in Dante's direction, who in turn tapped the staff against the floor gently, yet still causing the area to glow red. And in an instant, the Slayer has his plan formed, switching ammo to his cryo grenade and shooting it at Dante, who reflexively swats it away with very little difficulty, but as a result, a steam explosion goes off, obscuring Dante's vision for only a second. But it's enough as the Slayer has already gotten in above Dante, bringing down his sentinel hammer on the Devil Hunter's head, splitting his skull open as blood pours down Dante's face like a faucet. Before Dante is fully healed, the Slayer delivers a wide swing that sends Dante flying through a pillar down onto a platform below. Groaning as he sits up, he sees the Slayer once again falling down at unnatural speeds. His hammer raised over his head, and Dante, still recovering, teleports back a good distance, with the impact from the Doomslayer landing already sending a powerful gust of wind his way. The two once again get to their feet, Dante keeping his usual smirk despite the injuries and activates Balrog, watching as the Slayer examined him from within his armor, but not waiting very long before once again advancing on Dante. But now Dante teleports in, landing a pair of jabs to the Slayer's helmet before ducking and weaving under a follow-up swing of the hammer and countering with an uppercut that only seems to be angering the larger Demon Slayer. And Dante is forced to try and grab the hammer, not wanting to have his skull cracked open once again, but as he does, the Doomslayer headbutts the son of Sparta, breaking his nose and forcing him back. Dante, however, similarly doesn't let his opponent follow up and performs a backflip kick hybrid to create space, seeming to stun the Slayer, and Dante takes the opportunity, moving in with a somersault kick to keep pressure on the Doomslayer, but a backhanded slash of the Doom Blade deflects Dante's kick and nearly takes the limb off, and a follow-up blood punch powered hook from the Doomslayer disorients Dante enough to leave him open. Capitalizing on this, the Doomslayer shoves his Doomblade into Dante's chest, straight through his heart. Dante coughs up blood as he's lifted into the air, meeting the Slayer at eye level. Yeah, I guess it has been a little too long since this happened. Should have seen this coming, honestly. The Slayer is unamused by Dante's devil-may-care attitude to the normally fatal blow and blasts him with a shoulder-mounted cannon's ice grenade, freezing him still before throwing him to the ground as hard as he can, immediately shattering the ice encasing his opponent before in the same motion he pulls out his chainsaw and slashes Dante across the chest. The crimson-cloaked devil hunter has no choice but to tough it out, letting the Doomslayer's attack push him back and waiting for him to get in close before switching to Cavalier and immediately swinging one half down, which is blocked by the Doomslayer's own chainsaw. Dante, in response, forces the other half of his buzzsaw into the ground, allowing him to force the Slayer back with its momentum, throwing him off balance. As his block falters, Dante allows the devil arm to spin him, sweeping the Doomslayer's leg, resulting in the first response Dante hears as he lets out a grunt of pain. Taking this as a good sign, Dante swings both ends of the buzzsaws into Doomslayer. However, he doesn't miss a beat and holds his hands out, catching each saw blade, the metal raining sparks everywhere as the saws are grounded down by the Praetor's suit. He then lands a powerful kick on the Son of Sparta, creating space. The two opponents take a moment to catch their breath, their wounds starting to catch up with them. The Slayer is the first back to his feet, his armor protecting him from the brunt of the damage, and cracking his neck, he pulls out his rocket launcher as Dante does the same, both fighters letting out a barrage of missiles that collide in the air, throwing dust and debris everywhere. The loss in vision doesn't last long as the dust is ripped apart by seemingly endless projectiles ripping through it from both ends. The Doomslayer firing his chain gun and Dante throwing countless red orbs his way. Some of the shots collide, others miss entirely, yet most embed themselves into their intended targets, with neither man seeming too bothered by the wounds. But the Slayer, looking to get closer, activates his plasma shield, and Dante, seeing the shots no longer cutting into the Slayer, decides to ramp up the pressure and starts to power up Red Hot Knight, channeling his orbs into the weapon just as the Doomslayer runs out of ammunition and fires his shield at Dante, forcing him to throw the Faust hat to cut the projectile, wasting the charge. Dante slides the hat back into place, tilting his head down and taking a dramatic pose as the Slayer throws his chain gun to the ground. The two once again sizing each other up, both now realizing the danger each of them face as opponents. Dante sighs and allows the hat to disappear, his relaxed stance gone, and his tense body language betraying the confident smirk he still wore. You know, as much as I'm sure we both love our toys, this doesn't need to be heading in any particular direction. The Slayer starts to pace around Dante, his visor starting to malfunction, so he takes it off and drops it, looking Dante in the eyes as he watched the older man speak. So how about we cut to the chase? It's always the old reliable tools that settle fights like these, Dante says, summoning his devil sword, the blade instantly splitting down the middle as Dante allows his energy to flow through it, pointing it at the Slayer, who, despite his unflinching rage-filled expression, seems to agree, reaching around and pulling the crucible from his back, activating it and getting into his battle stance, the pair staring each other down, but only for a split second. Then they close the distance in an instant, clashing blades, both going all out in an attempt to overwhelm the other. And as a result, Dante very quickly finds himself on the back foot. He takes a step back and raises his blade to stop a blow from the crucible that should have bisected any other demon. But before he can even push back, the Slayer moves in, cutting Dante across the gut with his doom blade. Wincing, Dante accidentally leaves himself open, which the Slayer uses to reach out, grabbing Dante by the face and slamming him headfirst into the stone floor, breaking it as they fall down to the next layer of what seems to be some sort of submerged temple. In midair, Dante manages to summon his devil sword blades and uses them to kick off the Slayer, pulling Ebony and Ivory out, and with as much power as he can channel in the short time frame, fires countless shots at his opponent, nearly all of which are deflected by the crucible. As Dante's about to hit the floor, he teleports once again, reappearing behind the Slayer and landing a cut down his back. He doesn't have time to follow up on this blow as the Slayer, seeming to be more pissed off than hurt by the blow, spins on his heel and lashes out with several powerful blows that Dante is forced to block. It continues like this for a minute, Dante playing defense and blocking each strike while the Doomslayer is determined to try and break past his guard, eventually seeing an opening after Dante is staggered by a downwards power strike and taking it, thrusting his Doom Blade at Dante's face, but before it lands, the Devil's Sword's summon blades lash out, each landing a cut on a different part of his body, taking him off guard and forcing him to stumble. Seeing the split-second opening, he takes it without any hesitation, thrusting his blade forward, again and again and again, using Stinger to repeatedly stab into the Slayer before one final thrust finally manages to pierce through the Praetor armor. The Slayer looks down in shock, never having expected this man to break through his armor. However, the seemingly mortal wound doesn't shake the Slayer. It infuriates him and fuels him even further. Grabbing onto the blade, he pulls himself even further onto it, getting close enough to shove his super shotgun right into the half-demon's face. But as he pulls the trigger, Dante teleports away, reappearing across the room. Dante then decides that this fight has gone on long enough, immediately charging at the Slayer, who reacts in kind. The pair closing the distance yet again, yet as they are about to clash, Dante activates his Devil Trigger and moves past the Slayer, managing to cut deep into the larger man's side. Dante doesn't let up, now unleashing his entire arsenal of powers, landing blow after blow, and at first it seems to be working, but not how he intended. Sure, Dante is consistently landing blows, but the Doomslayer hasn't just been standing there too stunned to take the damage. He's been hitting back and landing just as many blows as Dante, the floor quickly being covered in their blood as they've traded one stalemate for another. And while both men are clearly feeling the fatigue and pain from this battle, neither is slowing down faster than the other, still matching each other. Then Dante goes for an overhead blow, planning to cut the Slayer down, imbuing his energy into the weapon, but at the last second, the Slayer dodges to the side and with a single slash removes Dante's arms just below the elbows. The son of Sparta swears from the pain, but immediately starts healing, just not fast enough as the Slayer has time to pull out the Unmaker and opens fire at full force onto Dante, the force of the weapon severely damaging him as he's thrown into a wall. Still healing even though he's barely able to stand, Dante watches as the Slayer grabs Dante's own sword from its spot on the ground, dual wielding it with the crucible. Now that's just cute, Dante says with a smirk as the weapon disappears from the Slayer's grasp, reappearing not in Dante's own hand, but in front of him before plunging into his own chest. The Slayer doesn't even have time to understand what just happened before the resulting explosion of demonic energy obliterates the temple they had been in, the Slayer being thrown out, bouncing off of the surface of lava like a skipping stone before crashing into a volcano. And before he can even get to his feet, Dante, now in his Sin Devil Trigger state, appears in front of the Slayer, slashing down so hard a massive crater is formed around him, setting the volcano off as it explodes, blacking out Hell's bright red sky. The Slayer tries to get to his feet, but Dante doesn't relent, smashing into the man, spinning in a cyclone, ripping chunks of flesh from the man and smashing through pieces of his armor without any effort. The Slayer falls to his knees and a sphere of demonic energy engulfs him. Dante, floating above, closes his hand, causing the demonic energy to explode, engulfing the Slayer. Dante now begins to float down, nearly hitting the ground when a high volume of Argent energy blast starts slamming into him, cutting right through his demonic hide from the smoke as the Doomslayer is still standing and firing the Unmaker yet again. Dante in turn unleashes his laser barrage, matching the Unmaker's fire, causing a clash of energy. The Slayer, knowing he'll need to reload soon, decides that it's finally time to draw out his trump card, and firing the Unmaker with one arm, pulls out the BFG with another, aiming and shooting just as the other weapon runs out. Dante at first tries to overwhelm the blast, but is unable to do so before it's too late. And Dante, not having time to dodge, makes the split-second decision to exit his Sin Devil Trigger and enter his normal Devil Trigger state, throwing up a Royal Guard right before it hits him. The resulting blast sends out a shockwave that clears everything around the two. Now on the ground, Dante trembles as his body is now healing at a fraction of its usual pace. His arms and legs are charred to the bone from shielding his body, the shattered fragments of the summoned swords that had defended him embedded deep into his skin, his leathery wings burnt away and blood spilling freely from his demonic form. Standing across from him, the Slayer is similarly struggling as he starts moving with a limp, once again letting the pain drive him as he closes the distance towards Dante, who stands ready. And as the Slayer gets into striking distance, he swings down at Dante. But just before the strike connects, Dante once again summons his blades, striking up with all four of them at once, parrying the blow from the Slayer, giving him just enough time to release the energy of Royal Guard, charged by the BFG 9000 and amped with his Devil Trigger, with a punch right into his opponent's chest. The top half of the Praetor suit is completely obliterated by the strike, but the Slayer doesn't go flying. Instead, his legs just give out and he falls to his back, struggling to stand before Dante swings his weapon down, stopping right before the Slayer's throat. Dante breathes heavily as he exits his Devil Trigger state, unwilling to kill the human but sending the message that he could have, before lifting the blade and starting to walk off. That is, until a sound from behind alerted him as another hybrid demon between a Fury and some sort of snake-like creature raises its blades, ready to strike the weakened Devil Hunter down, only for a meat hook attached to a chain to pull the demon back before a shot obliterates its skull, the body burning away as the Slayer stands, blood still dripping from his injuries, and the two stare each other down as demons surround them, looking to finish the weakened men off as Dante and the Slayer each pull out their preferred guns and spin around, going back to back, each aiming at the Horde. You know, you may be a pain in the ass to fight, but I'm hoping you're real fun to party with, Dante says, smirking as the demons draw in, as even in their current state, neither man felt threatened by the army closing in on. And with that, I declare Dante, the legendary devil hunter, the winner. Right, so before I get into my reasoning, I would like to remind everyone that this outcome is only possible with equalized stats. Even with the highest you can scale Dante, his power is defined by a measurement that the Doomslayer is simply beyond on a fundamental level. Now, it is actually possible to get this result without equal stats. All you need to do is either composite Dante or use SMT Dante, who scales to the Demi-Fiend who has outer versal scaling, and fights the same demons that gives Demi-Fiend this outer versal scaling. So this outcome really isn't too far-fetched. It's just not possible with the mainline canon Dante. Physicality is covered by equal stats, so I have nothing to elaborate on. So getting into the actual departments that matter, the gear, while clearly going to Doomslayer, overall it's important to remember that most of the elements that give Doomslayer the edge in this department, the protection, his mobility, and firepower, all goes to Dante once you take his powers into account, such as Royal Guard, teleportation, and higher amounts of movement boosts, and his demonic channeling, all of which only get improved under the effects of the Devil Trigger, meaning the only factor that gives the Slayer an edge here isn't going to make much of a difference in this fight. And that's before you take Dante's other abilities into account, such as his regen, which would even out the Praetor's suit's protection, and his Sin Devil Trigger's durability negation powers outright bypassing it. Now, that's not to say that Doomslayer loses every advantage he has. Variety overall still goes to him, but now that's about it. Combat skills can be summed up by the fact that Dante's multitude of combat styles would let him work around the Slayers, letting him block, work around, or simply evade far easier than the Slayer would be able to break through Dante's defensive and evasive abilities. Overall, the gap in power was really the only thing giving Doomslayer the win in this fight, and even then, not everyone buys outer versal doom scaling. So you could even make the argument that the Slayer is the one who needs equalized stats based on what scaling you do or don't buy into with both characters. But that's just my opinion. What do you think? Do you agree that with the right version or his stats equalized Dante wins? Or do you think that Doomslayer's pure ferocity would let him win the day? Let me know in the comments down below. If I got anything wrong, please feel free to correct me. And I would just once again like to thank everyone who made it possible for this video to be made. And I would like to personally thank each and every one of my now over 1,000 subscribers. Right, enough sappy shit. How about I show you all a preview of what to expect in Season 4.